because this family has suffered, and they've had to suffer in the public eye. And I want to offer my condolences to this family. I want to offer it for Maggie and Paul and Mr. Randolph, too, who I had the pleasure of working with on one occasion. But the reality remains is that despite all this attention, this case is about Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh, and I'm so thankful that the jurors gave them a voice. You heard about Paul. Obviously, there was the boat case, but you also heard him described as a fun-loving young man, a person who loved life, a person who would do anything for his friends, for anyone. And he's cut down as he was just starting to live his life. You heard about Maggie. You heard how sweet she was. You heard that she was a girl's girl who adapted to the outdoorsman life of her sons, how much she loved her sister and her brother-in-law and their children. And she was cut down in the prime of her life. Both of them, like everyone else, was unaware of who he really was. No one who thought they knew this man, no one who thought they were close to this man knew who he really was. And, Your Honor, that's chilling. And I've looked in his eyes, and he liked to stare me down as he would walk by me during this trial. And I could see the real Alex Murdaugh when he looked at me. The depravity, the callousness, the selfishness of these crimes are stunning. The lack of remorse and the effortless way in which he lies, including here sitting right over there in this witness stand. Your Honor, a man like that, a man like this man, should never be allowed to be among free, law-abiding citizens again. And I would submit to you that the only just sentence here to give justice for Maggie and Paul is the maximum, and that would be 2 consecutive life sentences. Thank you, Your Honor.
You indicate that no victim would like to speak at this time. Would any victim like to speak at any time during these proceedings?
Your Honor, one of the things we did early on, obviously, as I just said, it's a very complicated situation, but we made the decision early on. We've had our victim advocate here who's been doing a wonderful job, regardless of the viewpoints of any individual family member, to provide aid and service to them, and we made that decision. I'm informed by our victim advocate that none of them wish to speak. The defense can certainly address that, but that's what I am informed. They certainly were offered the opportunity as is required, and I want to commend our victim advocate on the excellent job she did in handling this complex situation that we wanted to be sensitive to, because again, none of us are not mindful of the fact of the suffering of this family.
I noticed Slate Chief Mark Keel is here. Would you like to address the court on any matters, Chief?
No, sir. District Slate, again, very proud of our agents' work they've done. I'm proud of the partnership that we've had with the Attorney General's office as we've had for many years. And again, we're here to see that justice is served, and we believe that.
Thank you. For the defense.
Your Honor, Mr. Griffin and I would have no comment. The defendant would like to address the court, though.
Mr. Murdaugh.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never hurt my son, Paul.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Sit down.
Yep.
Anything further?
I don't think further comment is necessary, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Murdaugh, if you will come before the court for sentencing. This has been perhaps one of the most troubling cases, not just for me as a judge, for the state, for the defense team, but for all of the citizens in this community, all the citizens in this state, and as we've seen based on the media coverage throughout the nation, you have a wife who's been killed, murdered, a son savagely murdered, a lawyer, a person from a respected family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century, a person whose grandfather's portrait hang at the back of the courthouse that I had to have ordered removed in order to ensure that a fair trial was had by both the state and the defense. And I've sat through the trial. Not only have I sat through the trial, but also as the presiding judge of the state grand jury, sat through and participated in the issuance of search warrants of various sorts, bond hearings, and have had to consider many things. And we have this case, and I'm also assigned to preside over 99 others, at least 99 other cases. Though testimony has come up regarding many of those other cases, I will not make any comment with regard to any other pending matter, as I have been assigned those cases as well. It's also particularly troubling, Mr. Murdaugh, because as a member of the legal community and a well-known member of the legal community, you've practiced law before me, and we've seen each other at various occasions throughout the years. And it was especially heartbreaking for me to see you go in the media from being a grieving father who lost a wife and a son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing them. And you've engaged in such duplicitous conduct here in the courtroom, here on the witness stand, and as established by the testimony throughout the time leading from the time of the indictment and prior to the indictment throughout the trial to this moment in time. Certainly, you have no obligation to say anything other than saying not guilty. And obviously, as appeals are probably expected or absolutely expected, I would not expect a confession of any kind. In fact, as I've presided over murder cases over the past 22 years, I have yet to find a defendant who could go there, who could go back to that moment in time when they decided to pull the trigger or to otherwise murder someone. I have not been able to get anyone, any defendant, even those who have confessed to being guilty, to go back and explain to me what happened at that moment in time when they opted to pull the trigger, when they opted to commit the most heinous crimes known to man. In this case, qualifies under our death penalty statute based on the statutory aggravating circumstances of 2 or more people being murdered by the defendant by one act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct. I don't question at all the decision of the state not to pursue the death penalty. But as I sit here in this courtroom and look around the many portraits of judges and other court officials and reflect on the fact that over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct. Remind me of the expression you gave on the witness stand. Was it tangled?
Tangled web, we weave.
Oh, what tangled web we weave. What did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end? When will it end? And it's ended already for the jury because they've concluded that you continued to lie and lied throughout your testimony. And perhaps with all the throng of people here, they, for the most part, all believe, or 80, 90%, 99% believe that you continue to lie now when your statement of denial to the court. Perhaps you believe that it does not matter, that there's nothing that can mitigate a sentence given the crimes that were committed. You know, a notice of alibi was filed in this case by counsel in November, and we conducted a hearing, pretrial hearing, in which you claimed to have been someplace else at the time the crime was committed. Then, after all of the witnesses placed you at the scene of the crime, at the last minute, or last minutes or days, you switched courses and admitted to being there. And then that necessitated more lies and continued to lie. And I said, where will it end? It's already ended for many who have heard you and concluded that it'll never end. But within your own soul, you have to deal with that. And I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you. I'm sure.
All day and every night.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they will continue to do so. And reflect on the last time they looked you in the eyes, as you looked the jury in the eyes. I don't know person who's always been such a gregarious, friendly person and cause your life to be tangled in such a weave web such a situation that yours have spun into, and it's so unfortunate because you had such a lovely family of such friendly people, including you, and to go from that to this. Your license to practice law has been stripped away from you. You turned from lawyer to witness, and now have an opportunity to make your final appeal as an ex-lawyer. And it's really surprising that you're waiving this right at this time. And if you opt to do so, it's on you. You're not compelled to say anything. But you have the opportunity to do so.
And I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paul.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been...
You are listening in on Alex Murdaugh's sentencing hearing. The judge expected to issue that sentence in just a moment. We're going to pause for just a brief moment right now.
Opioid pills.
You're listening right now to the sentencing hearing of Alex Murdaugh, convicted yesterday of murdering both his wife and his son.
Let's tune in South Carolina.
No, it's the
Breaking
same
news.
individual. We'll leave that at that. Before announcing sentence on these cases, with regard to all of the other pending cases, are any of them here in Colleton, or I'm sure some of them are?
Yes, sir.
Half of them, or?
I don't have that in front of me, but there are a substantial number of charges here. There's some in Hampton, Orangeburg, Beaufort, Allendale. There may be others that I'm not thinking of right now.
We might have worn out our welcome here in Colleton.
Colleton's been great.
They have been, and I'll take this opportunity to thank Sheriff Hill and all of the court officials and really everyone I've met and dealt with while here in Colleton County. Just been great. But without any delay, we're going to schedule some of the other matters. I know Mr. Harpootlian's scheduling is complicated, and you've sacrificed quite a bit to be able to be here defending Mr. Murdaugh, as well as the Attorney General's office, with all the other many things and obligations you have. And to be able to have the Attorney General here, Alan Wilson, for the period of time that he's devoted to being here, along with everyone else, it's been quite a sacrifice. But there are other victims whose cases deserve to be heard. And this case has jumped some of those other cases. Perhaps jumped it because of this case resulting in an assault on the integrity of the judicial system in our state, law enforcement in our state. Even during this trial, the law enforcement have been maligned for the past 5 or 6 weeks by one who had access to the wheels of justice, to be able to deflect the investigation And as the evidence is pointed out in this case, the looming storm that Mr. Waters talked about, I can just imagine on that day, June 7th, when a lawyer is confronted and confesses to having stolen over $500,000 from a client, and he has a tiger like Mark Tinsley on his tail pursuing discovery in the case involving the death of Mallory Beach, and having a father, for the most part, on his deathbed. I could imagine, or really can't imagine, but I know it had to have been quite a bit going through your mind on that day. But amazingly, to have you come and testify that it was just another ordinary day, that my wife and son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable. You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that. So if you made any such arguments as a lawyer, you would lose every case like that. Cases you will never have an opportunity to argue anymore, except perhaps your own as you sit in the Department of Corrections. Anything further?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for a term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably love so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive. Under the statute involving possession of a weapon during a violent crime, there is no sentence where a life sentence is imposed on other indictments. That is the sentence of the court, and you are remanded to the State Department of Corrections. And officers may carry forth on the imposition.
And there you have it. Alex Murdaugh has been sentenced to 2 life sentences to be served consecutively. The judge, in his words, calling it the rest of your natural life. 1 sentence for his wife, Maggie, another sentence for his son, Paul.
That's right. Sobering remarks. And we have full team coverage here with our legal analyst, Charles Coleman. So let's just talk about this for a minute, Charles. What do you make of the sentencing?
Well, this is not a surprise, given everything that we have seen up until this point. This was to be expected. You're talking about a double homicide. You're talking about circumstances which are pretty egregious. And then even though there weren't formal sentencing memos that were issued by either the defense or the prosecution, you have the aggravating circumstance of the gun that was used in the commission of the crime. And so everything about this case pointed to double life sentences, which is what I expected Judge Newman was going to do and what we saw happen today.
Still a few surprises. This was a relatively brief sentencing hearing, in part because we had no victim impact statements at all. And then we did hear briefly from Alex Murdaugh himself, who simply said, "I'm innocent innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie. I would never hurt my son, Paul, a statement he repeated later when pressed by the judge. Your thoughts on A, not hearing from victims, and B, what we did hear from Alex Murdaugh?
Well, Tom, this has just been an unusual case from the beginning, and so the timeline of everything that we've seen continues in terms of the brevity of this sentencing hearing. We talked about a verdict that was issued last night going into a sentencing hearing that starts at 9:30 the following morning. That's virtually unheard of in terms of the speed and how rapidly this occurred. Now, with respect to who we heard from and what we heard, I was a little surprised that the defense did not put forward any statements. I was also surprised that the prosecution didn't offer any sort of victim impact, anything whatsoever. But that could have also been a function of a family that may not have wanted to fully cooperate in terms of making matters worse and giving the prosecution more to go on. That being said, the thing about these sort of situations is you know what's coming. And so I don't know that more conversation from Alex Murdaugh himself would have made a huge difference in terms of how Judge Newman decided this case. I think he understood very clearly that once he was found guilty on both of those counts, he was looking at life in prison.
Well, we'll continue with this legal analysis, but first we're going to toss back to Judge Newman, who's speaking to the court right now.
They're encouraged to do so if that is their desire. I have no problem whatsoever with the jurors unmasking themselves and speaking freely with the media because they have undergone a life-changing experience as it relates to many of them. And some of them are here now, and I want them to know that should anyone attempt to harass them or annoy them, please let me know and I will address the issue. Secondly, there's a complaint now regarding the posting of autopsy photographs or photos that came from within the courtroom. It's based on the direction of the photographs. It did not come from the audience. It came somehow from within the well of the court. The parties have requested an investigation of that. I have my hands full doing my job, and I don't attempt to conduct any investigations beyond the conducting of a trial, but to the extent that law enforcement decides to review that, it would be the responsibility of law enforcement. Yes. And of course, one of the reasons we've sought to seal graphic photos is because the parties have a right to privacy and a right to those matters not being publicly disclosed. If anyone has heard about the recent settlement that Kobe Bryant's, another sports analogy, Kobe Bryant's wife just made with Los Angeles County and others out there over certain disclosures of information involving the death of Kobe Bryant, liability can be substantial, and it's a risk for the most part that's not worth taking. So we'll let everyone judge themselves accordingly with that regard. Aside from all that, our business is done here in Colleton County, and I get to use my gavel one or few times during this trial and order that court be adjourned. Sine die.
There you go. With a little bit of housekeeping going on there, Judge Newman hits the gavel, ending this sentencing hearing. Again, Alex Murdaugh sentenced to 2 life sentences to be served consecutively.
That's right. And so we want to talk to you, Charles Coleman, our legal analyst, because first of all, is it typical to have sentencing so soon after the charges.
No, that's relatively unusual, Jen Clay. We usually are required to submit sentencing memos. There's an investigation that's done. There are all sorts of reports that go into what it is that you're advocating, whether you are advocating for more time or a maximum sentence as a prosecutor, or whether you are looking to have the sentence somehow mitigated from whatever circumstances may arise around the defendant if you are a defense attorney. And so while I was unsurprised to hear last night the prosecution step forward and say, we'll be ready at 9:30 a.m., I was actually very surprised to hear the defense not ask for additional time, even if it was something like a week to that extent, to allow themselves to prepare for the sentencing memo. But in the event that this is South Carolina, it appears that they moved things very, very quickly. Judge Newman was ready to go, and now we see Alex Murdaugh has been sentenced.
You know, the judge, before he actually issued that sentence, spoke for several minutes, and he really sort of set the scene for why this has become a story that has captivated the nation, and that is because of the family history here. This is a well-known family in the legal community, someone the judge acknowledged he knew, someone who had argued before him in previous cases, and then he made just that sort of stunning observation that the Murdaugh family in the past had been prosecutors, and that they had likely prosecuted people who received the death penalty for what the judge says probably for lesser conduct. That was just a stunning statement, wasn't it?
It was. I thought that Judge Newman really did a very good job of making a clear record as to why he was doing what he was doing with respect to the sentences that he handed out. I also thought, you know, when you are a judge, it is impossible. You're still a human being, and it is impossible for you not to have feelings about a case, a trial, the facts that come out, and not to be personally affected by that. But you cannot allow any of that to influence how you rule from the bench. But this is the opportunity, now that the jury has spoken and the conviction is clear, this is an opportunity for the judge to add some actual context and some framing around what took place in that courtroom and what he saw from the bench. And he was very clear about what he saw. He was very clear about what he observed. And I thought it was also chilling for him to talk about Maggie and Paul visiting him every night. That was something that I thought was amazing. And I thought that it was really, it spoke directly to his humanity and talking about how he viewed the trial as a human being, which was an extremely important point. You're right, it was stunning, it was chilling, but it was also very much so an explanation as to why we are where we are.
And we should be clear, the death penalty was not an option for him to issue as a sentence.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's not lost on me that just earlier this morning we heard from the South Carolina AG who said it was Alex Murdaugh's testimony that essentially put the nail in the coffin. What's your assessment? Because just yesterday we were talking about reasonable doubt.
Sure. Well, I tend to, I respect that the state attorney general has the position that he has in terms of his opinion, but ultimately I personally think it was the rebuttal closing by the prosecution that ultimately gave them an opportunity to really win this case, because quite frankly, reasonable doubt existed to me throughout the duration of this case. It was a very, very sharp and very, very strong rebuttal closing that was offered by the prosecution, because that was the first time that they really began to get away from this notion of motive. And they started to talk about, look, we don't have to prove no motive. We don't have to actually sell you a narrative. It'd be great if we could, but the reality is this is about whether you believe that he did it. And that was something that I thought made a huge difference. As far as him testifying, Zen Clay, the thing that I say often is lawyers make the worst clients, because as an attorney, you think to yourself, look, I've cross-examined people before. I know what a trial is. I know what this is about. But you've never been cross-examined. You've never stood and swore yourself in your testimony on an oath, and you've never actually had the pressure of being in front of a jury and having to answer questions and watching these cameras in the court. It's a very different experience. But if you are not someone who has an appreciation for how different and how difficult that can be, it can really shift your belief about your ability to handle these things in this situation. I think that's what happened to the defendant here.
We have less than a minute here, but we heard very little from the defense yesterday, only to say they're disappointed. We expect now we're going to hear more from them, but almost certainly an appeal is expected now, right?
I would expect so. It would surprise me if they did not, But at the same time, I will also say that the likelihood of success here is extremely low.
All right, we'll see what happens and what they have to say. Charles Coleman, thank you so much for your analysis. We appreciate it. Again, to recap, Alex Murdaugh, who was convicted by a jury in less than 3 hours yesterday of murdering both his wife and his youngest son, today has been sentenced to life in prison.
That's right. Stay with us. We've got more news straight ahead on this trial and a whole lot more.